know, when you sum up your life in these like brief bios and introductions, they tend to sound a lot more glamorous than you actually are. And I'm always a little bit shocked, to be honest with you, when I'm invited to participate at events like this, because my entire career has been riddled with failure. I've raised millions of dollars for organizations, some of which have turned out to be successful, and some of which have turned out to not be. But what I would like to talk with you all today is about that very topic of failure and innovation. Thank you. Sometimes innovations can be small things, like lifting a microphone. Other times they're a lot harder and a lot more complicated than we initially think that they are. I'm going to start off with a story, and this is a true story. I currently live in New York City and spend a lot of time on our subways, and we have a lot of subway performers. Now, typically in New York City, when you're riding on the way to work, you normally see a glazed over look in most people's faces. And another subway performer came on to the train that I was on, to the 2 train. And I had my headphones in, and I wasn't really paying attention to anything. And I saw an immediate change in the look of the people on the subway. So I took out my headphones, and I heard legitimately one of the best musical performances I've ever heard in my entire life, paid or not paid. And people doled out their dollars here and there. The subway performer collected it. At the next stop, he got off. And I don't know why I did this, but I followed the subway performer off the car. And I said, hey, look, I know this is a little bit weird, but I have a question for you. I was like, why did you never try to make like a serious go at it from a career standpoint? Like, I think you could legitimately be like an incredible musician. And he said, for me, it's about collecting $1 or $2 every 2 minutes and sustaining my life and going about what I do. You see, the point of this story really gets down to what we believe to be possible in our lives. Some people start out their musical career in garage bands and have this belief that they're going to be the next great musician. They're going to be the next thing that you all have to know about. And other people with the same level of talent are content to perform in the subway and coast. Now, I bring this story up because I think we have a problem in philanthropy. And I think what that problem is that we are incredibly disincentivized to solve the problems that we're out to solve. We are, more times than not, content with being subway performers. And there is nothing wrong with being a subway performer, but at the end of the day, what I really, really want to focus on, what I really want to talk about, is working ourselves out of a job. None of us in this room should have a job, meaning we should be aggressively working to work ourselves to the point where the problem that we are attacking is solved. And this talk today is really geared around those that want to start the next garage band and really solve what they're after. So our counterparts in the private sector have figured this out a very long time ago. In the venture capital community, in the private sector, where millions upon millions of dollars are flowing to privately held companies, there's a fundamental belief. And that is, you do not put your money in something that does not have the ability to completely change the world, to completely change the game, to be, if successful, the next Facebook, the next Ford, whatever it may be. And the venture capital community that mobilizes billions of dollars a year understands that if they invest in 10 things, 4 or 5 of them are going to completely fail within a year. 2 or 3 of them are going to hold their value, but 1 or 2 are going to change everything. And that is completely at odds with a lot of the ways that we approach philanthropy, which is we tend to make safer bets so our donors are content with turning over money every single year. Today, I want you to suspend belief and think about what it feels like to potentially shift the paradigm a little bit and say, we're going to go for it, and we may completely fail. So I want to start by talking about my upbringing. So I'm from New York, don't hold that against me. I am the son of two educators. My father was a drug counselor in the 70s, who eventually became the superintendent of one of the largest school systems in New York. And my mother was a health and PE teacher. So you see, my first cousin is the head of the teachers union nationally. So what used to happen was my father would fire ineffective teachers, and my cousin would sue him. And this is how I spent pretty much every Thanksgiving growing up, which was a really, really just interesting way to live your life, being a part of these really sort of high-level conversations about education, charter movements, things like that. But at the end of the day, my father held the fundamental belief that you either do the job right or you don't belong in the classroom. And it was sort of that mentality that I took with me when I went to school. I went to the University of Georgia, being from New York, which was an interesting experience for another day. And Hurricane Katrina happened my sophomore year to my junior year. And I called my parents and I said, I think I'm going to drop out. I was like, I don't know why, but I have a feeling that this is going to be my generation's civil rights cause. I used to ask my parents growing up, what were you doing during civil rights? And my parents had a damn good answer for it. And I remember thinking, when Katrina happened, when I eventually have children, they're going to look to me and say, what did you do when this major disaster happened? And I wanted to have an answer. I had no tangible skill set. My parents obviously begged me and said, please, don't drop out of school. You don't know what you're doing. You won't be of any use to anybody. So I racked my brain, and I tried to think about, what can I do to raise money? If nothing else, if I'm not going to be there, I'd like to at least turn over a check to the American Red Cross. So I launched my first fundraising campaign. And I did it in a less scrupulous way than I usually share with people, but we'll talk about it now for the time being. I was a part of a fraternity, and I had this brilliant idea to give away $50 hugs. So I forced all of our pledges down into our student union with signs that said, $50 hugs for Katrina. And we wound up raising $10,000 in the course of like 3 days with $50 hugs. So I remember having this check, and I'm like thinking I'm the greatest fundraiser in the history of mankind. And I remember turning it over to the American Red Cross and legitimately being a little bit deflated. It's like, that's it? Like, there's no end game here. I just literally handed it over. So I told my parents, I really wanted to get my sleeves rolled up a little bit, and I wanted to be involved in just a little bit more major of a way than I currently was. So late one night in college, I was had a couple beers, and I watched Lean on Me, Dangerous Minds, and I was like, I could be like Morgan Freeman and Michelle Pfeiffer rolled into one and just like go down and kick some butt. So I applied to a program called Teach for America, and they placed me in New Orleans, Louisiana. And this was the year that the public school system had opened back up. So they had no idea what was going on in terms of enrollment numbers because the kids had been displaced all over the country. So schools that had 500 students before Katrina, they thought maybe we were going to have 300. And they would staff their schools accordingly. I sat in on over 6 staff meetings at 6 different schools because in the weeks leading up to the school opening, they were like, okay, you're gonna be here, you're gonna be a middle school science teacher, and then the enrollment numbers were low, and they were like, oop, we don't need you anymore, and being a 21-year-old, I was the low man on the totem pole. So they're like, okay, now you're a kindergarten teacher over here. Go sit in on that staff meeting. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna be a kindergarten teacher, kind of a different mindset, but all right, let's roll with it. And that happened continually until the day before school. I had no classroom. I had no school to go to. And I got a phone call from a woman. Her name was Dr. Vanessa Eugene. And she said, Mr. Bordainick, you're going to be teaching at George Washington Carver High School in the lower Ninth Ward, which for those of you that don't know was the area most affected by Hurricane Katrina. And I said, okay, what time should I arrive? She said, be there by 7:30 and we'll show you to your classroom. I said, what am I teaching? She said, we're still figuring that out. So I drove through the lower Ninth Ward, and I found the address that she gave to me. The traffic lights weren't working. Military police were still patrolling the area because the police force hadn't reached critical mass yet. to be able to handle it. And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, this is going to be an interesting day, as I pulled into a parking lot of an abandoned private school that had 8 FEMA trailers in it. And after the storm, the private school had donated their space to the public school system, and the public school system set up these trailers. So I got out of my car, and they said, let me show you to your classroom. They opened up a door to a FEMA trailer that had about 30 students, 20 desks. And for those of you that don't know, I was 21 years old. And after Katrina, the state had allowed the age that you could be in school to rise from 18 to 20. So of course, with my beautiful luck, I was teaching seniors. A majority of my students were 19 and 20 years old, and I had just turned 21. It went about as well as you thought it went. And about halfway through my first day, someone said, you're going to be a geography teacher. This is a geography class. And I was like, all right, welcome to geography. And I was approached by a gentleman who was in his mid-40s at the time, who was to be the athletic director at the school. And I get stereotyped a lot because I'm very tall. I'm an awful basketball player, but he approached me and said, how would you like to coach women's basketball at our school? And I said, sure, look, I'm obviously an awful teacher. These kids hate me. So anything that I can do outside of the classroom to engage these kids, of course I'll do it. Why wouldn't I? So a couple days later, where are we going to play? What are we going to do? How are we going to get the kids physical screenings? All of this. He quit. And our principal called me into her office. I didn't like do anything wrong. We were just like having a normal conversation. And she asked me, how would you like to be the athletic director of this school? And in famous last words, I remember thinking to myself, how hard can this possibly be? So I accepted the job, and at 21 years old, became the youngest athletic director in the history of the state. Sounds sexy, but in reality, it was just a casual conversation that led to this, and it was something that, again, that when you talk about a bio or things like that, that people tend to talk about. So now, fast forward a day or two, the same questions that I was asking of this gentleman, people were asking of me. Where are we playing? How are we going to get the kids' medical screenings? All of these things. So I started on a path like many of you may be on currently, which is let's focus on what's in front of me and let's do some straight blocking and tackling. Let's get this thing to a spot where it's nice and it's good, it's like moving. So I didn't know where the kids, you know, like when you played high school sports, how many of you played high school sports? Okay, so your experience probably went a little something like this, right? Athletic director or coach hands you a physical form, says, go see your doctor, bring it back to me in a couple days, and we'll get started. So I followed that path. Printed out the physical forms, handed it out to the kids, said, anyone interested in playing basketball, fill out the form, bring it back to me. No one brought anything back. Of course, why would they? So I remember looking into the problem was none of them had a doctor. So I took it upon myself to pull out the phone book and start looking up medical practices in New Orleans. And I started randomly calling doctors and saying, hi, my name is Brian, I'm 21, I'm the athletic director of this school, I clearly have no idea what I am doing, how would you like to come to our campus and screen about 200 kids for physicals? They said, no, thank you. So here I am trying to get the simplest of things done, and I finally said, all right, to hell with it, and I drove to an emergency room, and I cornered a doctor, not dangerously, but just went to a doctor and said, listen, I have a real problem here. I need to get these kids screened. Can you please help me? And the head of Tulane's medical practice basically gathered a bunch of interns. They came out to the school. They screened all these people. I'm, in my head, the greatest athletic director in the history of mankind. And all I had done was get this screening done. And we had to find a gym, and we found a building that had been dilapidated during the storm that had a gym in it prior, and they said, if you can get insurance on it, it's yours. So we brought in the state agency, we boarded up the parts of the school that you weren't supposed to go into and like hid some, dangling electrical wires, and we wound up having this building under contract. And then for equipment, I had this brilliant idea. This is one of my famous brilliant ideas. I was like, I'm gonna call the New Orleans Saints. They have all this practice equipment, and I'm gonna get like shorts and their old jerseys, and we'll be able to do something really cool here. So I call the Saints, get in touch with them, and I'm like, can you just ship me the boxes of stuff that you guys aren't using anymore? They're like, yeah, sure, why not? So a couple days later, I open up these boxes, and I remembered that those that play in the National Football League are slightly larger than high school kids. And we had like, size 5X shorts and, jerseys that you could, run a ship with. And we wound up hemming these things together, and we hosted our first athletic contest. We were scraping together to buy basketballs and shoes and all the other stuff. And it was a JV scrimmage. We were calling around everywhere. Will you come and play us in a game? And most people said no, because we weren't sanctioned. And then eventually we hosted our first JV scrimmage for a basketball game, and we had over 1,000 people show up in the gym for a game. And I remember thinking to myself, this is big, this is important, and we should be doing something more along these lines and going a little bit deeper each time. So fast forward to the spring, track, super easy, go run in the streets, like not that expensive to get off the ground. And I had this brilliant idea to do football. Now, football is not cheap. Pads, mouthpieces, helmets, footballs, cleats, you name it, it's expensive. So how am I supposed to raise the money when there's no cash to do any of this? So what we wound up doing was I convinced a few of my friends that summer to follow me from New Orleans and head down to the Florida Panhandle. And I promised them I'm only going to stop at Kiwanis, Knights of Columbus, Rotary clubs that are located next to a beach. So what we did was we basically outlined all the way down, and my friends, we would pack a cooler, and they would go to the beach with a case of beer, and I would throw on a shirt and tie and give a presentation in front of a room saying I'm trying to raise money to have our sports program. That year, my first year working there, we lost 5 kids to violent death. And it was a simple thesis. Look, I don't have all the answers, but I know that if I can keep these kids from 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock, the chance of them getting killed is going to decrease. And if that's not worth a bet, well then hell, I don't know what is. So that summer we wound up raising about $25,000 with my brilliant strategy. And I came back and we got on the blowhorn and we said, for any of you that are interested in playing football, mind you, I'm like, new helmets, new pads, I'm like, yeah, I'm really doing a great job here. Come and stay after school. We had a whopping 2 children show up. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. So you know how on classroom doors, they have those little skinny windows that you can see into? So I went with the guy who I hired to be our head football coach, and we would look into the classrooms. And we would notice big kids. So we would take those big children, and we would pull them into the hallway, and we would say, hey, we noticed you didn't come out for football before. Why don't you, come out for practice? They're like, not really interested. And then we had a roster and a Rolodex of their mother's phone numbers. So we would call their mom. This is really embarrassing. I don't know why I tell this story all the time, but we would call their mothers, and we would say, look, we're here with your son, and we're going to ask him to come out to stay after and to play football with us. They're like, he's yours. We're like, well, looks like you're playing football, buddy. We managed to scrounge up about 40 kids that first year, but there was something interesting that happened, and it took me a while to piece this together. Of about the 40 or 50 kids that we had an equal number of managers that came out. Meaning, these were people who just felt safe around our coaches. This has nothing to do with me. There was an after-school activity that was happening, and they wanted to be around it. So people thought I was insane. We used to show up to football games with a bus of student athletes and a bus of managers. And it became so ridiculous trying to find jobs for them to do. One guy was like, you bring this water bottle to this ref, you just hold the football tee, like the kicking tee, like that is all you do here. But it was important. And what we were doing, and I wasn't a fundraiser then, I was just a guy trying to raise money to get a job done. And we did not have a stadium, a place to play, nor did any public high school in the city of New Orleans. We were all using a public facility that charged about $5,000 a game. Mind you, at this point, my credit cards were maxed out. We had, for all the equipment that broke, we had raised what we were going to raise locally. And I had a strategy. We would sell tickets to the football game. and I would basically write a check for the stadium, hand it over to the woman, sell tickets to the game, and then I would haul it, like as fast as I could, to the bank with the cash receipts and try to deposit them before she cashed the check. So this strategy worked surprisingly well until one day it rained, like a torrential New Orleans gather two of every animal kind of rain, and no one showed up to the game. Handed over the check to the woman, and I said, if you cash this check, you're going to bounce a high school check. And she was like, your problem, not mine. And it was in this moment of desperation that I think some of the greatest ideas are birthed. A friend of mine sent me an email that said, the NFL is offering a competitive grant. It's up to $200,000 if you can raise a dollar-for-dollar match. It's due in 35 days. So, looking at myself and thinking about the story of the subway performer, what are you trying to do here? What are we trying to do here? Are we trying to raise money to buy more helmets, buy more footballs, and then be in the same situation again in a couple years? Or are we going to try to do something that's a little bit more garage band, that's going to blow it all up? Our school was not a school, it was a cluster of 8 trailers. And I decided, let's solve the problem, and let's solve it for us and all the other public high schools in the area. At 21, I decided I was going to build a synthetic turf football field, an 8-lane Olympic track, stadium seating, and lighting, open to the public for free. And I'm going to use this $200,000 NFL competitive grant to springboard this. So it was right around the time when Obama's first run for the presidency, and he was doing a lot of micro donations. So I had this brilliant idea, and I said, we're going to do it in $100 chunks. And mind you, I thought the $200,000 grant and the $200,000 that I was going to raise was going to do it. Like, we're going to build this whole thing for that. Mind you, it wound up costing close to like $2.5 million when it was all said and done. And what I did was, and this is something that I'm really, 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 truly grateful for the opportunity to speak in front of fundraisers, is that sometimes we think, and sometimes rightfully, but most of the time not, that it has to be perfect before we ship it out the door. It has to be so buttoned up, and we have to go to all of our stakeholders, and we have to figure it out. I didn't consult with the community. I didn't consult with our superintendent and say, hey, is this a good idea? Does it fit into our master capital plan? No. I produced this video, which is incredibly embarrassing, and I don't normally show this, but this is the very first video. This is before iPhone, so give me a break. But I basically went to school the next day after I found out about this grant, and I decided we're going to sell bricks, $100 bricks. And this is the video that I made.
One community devastated by Hurricane Katrina.
One wish to raise $200,000 and build a state-of-the-art football field and track.
Less than 1 month to make a difference.
One brick and a chance for a new beginning.
Okay, that's enough of that. But that you can tell my liberal use of construction paper and magic marker. But here's the thing. It's really scary to put yourself out there. It's extremely scary to swim upstream when everyone else would have done, hey, let's just help us rebuild our locker, help me get some operating capital to run my sports program for a couple years. That's an easier ask. A much easier ask than to say, I'm going to do this crazy, crazy thing, and I'm going to do it whether you choose to support me or not. Because let me tell you something, when you put yourself out there, your success threatens almost everyone else around you's existence. And what I mean by that is most people assume that X is possible in life, and whatever they put as a ceiling for that is what they believe. And if you threaten that by talking about building a football field in the Ninth Ward, that stands directly in their face. And as fundraising professionals, what I encourage you to do is to build something crazy, build something new, because here's the truth, no one wants to create a wave. I learned this very difficult lesson, but everyone wants to ride one. Meaning your first check is the hardest. No one wants to write that first check, and certainly no one wants to write that check to support your operational budget. We all know that. But the second your project or your idea, it looks like success is inevitable, people will come out of the woodwork. And what we're talking about is building your tribe of weirdos. That video was my first attempt to float something out there and see, does anybody care? I'm trying to do this ridiculous thing, does anybody care? The truth of the matter was, no. No, they didn't. I called every single friend I had and family member, and I said, donate to this project or I will never speak to you again. And I had a website, and it had a thermometer on the bottom that said 0 and had a thermometer on top that said 200,000. It had this like ticking kind of time bomb thing in the top right, which was days until the grant was due. And it was designed for the specific intent of giving you anxiety when you looked at the site. And I woke up the next morning, and no one, it was like $1,200 and the stupid thermometer didn't even move. And I remember thinking, this is gonna be a long 30 days. I started cold calling people randomly, saying, hey, this is what I'm doing. I stretched the truth like a little bit, but I basically sent out an email, and your intention when sending out an email is extremely important, right? Most of the people who you send an email to are gonna be opening on their mobile device, and you get your subject line in like maybe one sentence. So, you know, where I stretched the truth a little bit was I said, partner with the NFL, which could have been true if we had won the grant. And I said, in the very first line, I wanted to make you cry. So I was like, my name is Brian Bordainick, I'm 21 years old. I lost 5 kids to violent death at my school last year, and I want to do something about that. So partner with the NFL and myself and help us get this done. So we were the laughingstock of New Orleans, I kid you not. People would start taking meetings with us just to have me sit in their office and be like, this kid is nuts. Like, there's not even a school, that entire community doesn't even have houses. Hell, I don't even have a house right now. Like, we're trying to get back on our feet, and you're talking about building a football in the night. What are you doing? In some meetings, in some instances, I couldn't even get my parking validated. And what started to happen was, as I started to call people, this idea, as it began to get talked about in our community, and as I kept pressing palms and getting out there, began to attract certain people. The former the former general manager of the New Orleans Saints called me and said, this sounds crazy. If you get the grant, I'll give you $25,000. So now we have the support of the Saints. A couple of players had chipped in $1,000 here or there. And I remember thinking, oh my God, how do you actually build a football field? So I started calling architects randomly and found one of the biggest architectural firms in the world, which will remain nameless, and I said, hey, look, I got this grant due, it's due in 30 days. Can you help me out, and can you do the design and the budgets and the renderings, and just show that if I am successful, that the NFL releases this $200,000 to me, that I can actually, you know, build the thing that I'm talking about. They're like, not a problem, this sounds cool, we'll help you out. So, I am running amok all over the place, I am ragged. And we had now this architectural firm online. I sat down with the superintendent of my school district and said, look, I don't need any cash right now. If I win this grant, give me $100,000. If you're gonna rebuild the school, I'm gonna get you $1 for 50 cents, basically. So just commit to the 100K. So he commits to it. Now my thermometer's starting to move a little bit, feeling pretty good. I'm sitting in a coffee shop approximately 5 days before this grant is due. I get a phone call. And on the other end of the line is a woman who says, hi, my name is Nancy. I represent the Nike Corporation. And I wanted to know if $100,000 would help you get closer to your goal. Weird question because it's basic math, but yeah, of course it would. How would it not? And mind you though, I was still at the age where my friends would call me and mess with me all the time. So it's getting really close to like the end of this grant being due, and I'm like, listen, lady, please don't mess with me right now. Like, this is not cool, and I hung up on her. Yeah. So she calls back, and she's like, Brian, don't hang up on me again. We want to wire over $100,000 in cash tomorrow morning. I'm going to send you a form in your email, and what I need you to do is send me your bank routing and ABA information, and we'll have it done tomorrow morning. I hang up the phone, and I remember thinking, oh my God, we don't have a bank. So I show up at our local community bank the next morning, and I say, I need to open an account right now because I'm waiting on a $100,000 wire from the Nike Corporation. The guy's like, what are you talking about? So I'm like, literally, I have to get this done. So he goes in, we create the account, and sure as the day is long, like 5 seconds later, Nike wires over 100K, and he's like, who are you? So at this point, things had hit sort of a fever pitch with Nike behind us, some Saints players behind us. We were looking like we were going to hit our goal. And media started to take a hold of this. Here's this crazy kid who's starting to make progress on building this football field and track. They were coming to the school, and you can't make stories like this up. As all of the media presence are coming over to my classroom, I get a phone call from our architectural firm. And they said, listen, this is terrible, but we can't actually fulfill our promise to do this, to give you the renderings, the satellite, all of that, the budget, little thing like that may be important. We had a couple last minute projects come up, and we apologize, but there's nothing we can do. Mind you, the grant's due in like 3 days. So I hang up the phone, do the interviews. Now kids are bringing handfuls of change. Checks are coming in from all over the place. And as the media left, I remember thinking, oh my goodness, this is terrible. So I started calling around to local architectural firms in the city. And I said, look, I need you to do me a solid here. If you've ever done a football field in the past, just like scratch off whatever you had on there and just put, George Washington Carver High School with like the budget and the imaging, and we'll figure it out once the grant's due. And they're like, that's completely illegal. So as it turns out, I had a friend of mine who was at a holiday party who basically handed the phone to one of the top architects in the city, and he said, you have 30 seconds to pitch your idea, go for it. So I was like, hey, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm working on, you probably have seen it on the media. He goes, okay, let me make a few phone calls to a couple of my partners and I'll call you back. Now, as it turns out, the other partner at the firm, a guy named Mark Ripple, who I love very dearly, the next day was doing garden work with his wife. And Mark doesn't like garden work particularly much. And he gets a phone call from another partner who says, I got this crazy kid who's talking about putting together an entire pack for a football field in a weekend. You want to go meet with him? And he's sitting there with his wife, and he's like, honey, I gotta go. So he shows up, and on the way to work, he starts calling a few of his employees and saying, I can't force you to do this, but if you want to come in and you want to work on this, by all means do. We had about 10 people show up. We threw together an entire plan in a day. And of course, I missed the last UPS drop. Yeah. It's actually really comforting to be talking in front of fundraising professionals because you know what that feels like. Almost every single one of you know in your particular city when the last UPS pickup is at what mailbox, which is really comforting. So I missed it. And we wound up calling like Delta Dash to be like, we have to get this grant to New York, can you help us out? And they were like, it was like $10,000 or something like that, so we didn't use that service. But anyway, we figured it out, and the second we submitted the grant, the NFL called and said, are you serious? Because most people who submit this type of stuff, it's literally for a goalpost that blew over or to repaint the lines on a field or to do something like that. This is ridiculous. You're talking about a $2 million capital project. Like what? And we said that we were serious. So as we continued to go on, I thought initially I was raising money for a football field. I really did. I spent 3 years of my life, hat in hand, trying to raise money for a football field. And then we started to look at things, like the fact that our student athletes came to school 35% more often, that they were 40% less likely to get suspended, that none of my athletes had died from violent behavior. In the second year I was there, we lost 6 kids to violent death. In the third year, we lost 5 again. So we had this really simple thesis, which was like, here's our little sports stadium, that it's not the best use of $2 million, I hate to break it to you, but if we put this thing here, We have a shot at saving a couple kids' lives, and it's as simple as that, and it's worth a bet. And if you can tell me a better way to do it, I'm more than happy to hear it. And what we wound up doing towards the end there was likening what we were doing to not building a football field, but to what we believe we were actually doing. So we got a little bit better with our production value, and I'm going to show you this one.
Our teachers said,
Our coaches say,
Our parents say,
That if you're willing to work hard
and refuse to take no for an answer.
Anything is possible.
We believe that anything is possible.
Where you see a cracked street, you see the only track we ever known.
Where most people see depressing white trailers, we see a classroom.
Where many people look at our city and still see devastation.
We see an opportunity.
To start over.
To dream big.
To build a field of dreams.
A state-of-the-art community space with a football field and track.
Open to the public, free of charge.
A field of dreams.
To show that no matter what today looks like, tomorrow can be different.
To create a safe place to play out our dreams.
To keep our heads in the game.
A field of dreams.
And now our dream is closer than ever to becoming a reality.
But to finish, we need your help.
It's game time.
Make a donation.
Make an investment in my future.
In our school. In our community.
Make an investment in the 9th Ward Field of Dreams.
So that when next season starts,
5 years after we lost our school,
we can have a new start.
Because whether you're from New Orleans,
New York,
9th Ward,
Uptown,
La Place.
we all know what it feels like to dream big.
and we all need to believe
that no matter how big your dream is,
No matter how hard it is to achieve,
and no matter how many people tell you no,
If we come together, anything's possible.
I wrote that script in the parking lot the day of the shoot. The interesting thing about that was that we were trying to tie what we were doing into this larger narrative about the city. And it was at that point, once this video was out there, the media was starting to cover the story more and more, we got a phone call from CNN, and they said, Anderson Cooper wants to know if it's cool if he hosts the 5-year anniversary of Katrina from your school. Sure, why not? We host a show. After the show, we had a ton of more micro donations, and then also I got an email from someone named Ariadne Getty. And Getty is, they were the first American billionaires, oil, Getty Museum, et cetera. And the email was sent from a BlackBerry, and it just said, Brian, want to finish project. We had a delta of about, I think, $400,000 at the time. And she said, I'm gonna send a plane for you, which is a ridiculous statement for one to make. And come out to LA and let's talk about it. And I remember thinking to myself, my project is either funded or this is like the most clever way to steal someone's organs ever. And it wasn't the latter, it was the former. So she wound up finishing up the project. And a lot of people hear this story and a lot of people call me lucky. It's true. When you start to classify entrepreneurs, there's a great book called Heart, Smarts, Guts, and Luck. And it tries to classify human beings, entrepreneurs, fundraisers, into those 4 categories. Heart, people who care more. Guts, people who are big, audacious thinkers. Smarts, people who are just generally smarter than the rest of us. And luck. And luck, we typically associate with a negative connotation. I don't take that negatively at all. I'm a very lucky entrepreneur. The reason why I'm lucky is that you have to be able to set yourself up in these situations to be lucky. How do you get CNN to notice what you're doing? I started a nonprofit in New Orleans. Brad Pitt had a nonprofit a block away from mine. Everybody and their mother had a nonprofit in New Orleans after Katrina. It really is about standing out, and how do you do that unless you're thinking out of the box and bigger, and that if you fail, it's gonna be an utter joke. The people that we assembled around that idea were people who believed that if this project were to get done, it would solve the problem. And that was what we were fighting for sort of constantly. So I used to always close these sort of talks by saying things like, you know, move fast and break things, and like, don't worry about the status quo, just like go for it. But there's actually sort of 4 phases of doubt that I think that most people encounter when trying to bring about change, especially change within an organization. And the first thing is, if you have a different fundraising strategy or a different approach, chances are no one cares. And I mean that like when I produced my first video. No one cared. I remember this story, and this is particularly apt for fundraising professionals. It was 3 years into that project, and we had about a $750,000 gap, and I was sitting on a bench outside of my classroom. I had my head in my hands, and I remember just saying, a student of mine stopped by, and she was like, "What's the matter?" And I remember saying to her, this is so hard, we're just never gonna get this done. Her name was Tatiana, and she looked at me and she said, "Baby, ain't nobody asked you to do this to begin with." And it's the truth. No one told me to, no one was forcing me to go and build a stadium or to go and do it. And that sort of mentality, I think, is really, really interesting, and it ties into our first level of doubt, which is that no one cares. You have to make them care. The second is that you are not going to be able to achieve what you say you're going to achieve. So even if I do care about the problem that you're solving, I don't think that you can solve it. The third is that, okay, fine, you solve the problem, but it's not sustainable. You can't do it again. Technologies and different solutions that we sometimes come up with in the philanthropic world are expensive. They sometimes can be inefficient. It's not going to be sustainable, and you can't do it again. And the fourth is that your idea won't scale. And know that no matter where you are in that continuum, there are going to be people who are attacking you and are doubting you and are saying that what you are trying to do can't be done. And instead of saying move fast and break things and be fearless, you should be afraid. All of us should be. And we should move forward, but we should build our organizations and we should raise money like we were destined to solve the problem that we are trying to solve. And I hope at your next fundraising meeting, you tell people you shouldn't have a job. And for me, I believe that in philanthropy, if we stop taking these safe bets and we start moving forward in a little bit more of an aggressive way, we can really start to solve some of these problems. And I hope deep down that you guys got a little something out of that story, but be a little bit reckless and have a little bit of fun out there. And I hope and I wish you all the best of luck in your endeavors. And thanks for letting me come talk to you all.